There's a reason we tell ghost stories in the fall. It's a season of beautiful decay. The world puts on one last brilliant show of color before it all dies and goes cold. There's a certain kind of sadness in the air, a nostalgia that can turn unsettling in the right light. People get drawn to the strange and the macabre, haunted hay rides, corn mazes, pumpkin patches. We're looking for a safe, controlled scare. But sometimes you wander off the path and you find a scare that isn't safe or controlled at all. You find something real, and it's been waiting for the harvest. My friends and I found one of those things our senior year of college. It was a local legend, the Blackwood Corn Maze. Every October, this old farmer, a grim-faced man named Silas Blackwood, would open his massive cornfield to the public. The legend wasn't just that the maze was impossibly difficult, it was that the maze was hungry. People would talk about the rules, silly, superstitious things you were supposed to follow. We thought it was all just a gimmick to sell more tickets. We were so wrong. There were 4 of us, me, my girlfriend Maya, and our friends Liam and Chloe. We decided to go on one of the last nights of the season, right before Halloween. It was cold, the air so crisp it hurt to breathe, and a huge, pale harvest moon hung in the sky. When we pulled up to the farm, the place had a weird vibe. There were no cheerful lights, no fun, spooky decorations, just a single bare bulb hanging over a wooden shack where a teenager was collecting cash. On a weathered board next to the entrance, the rules were hand-painted in stark black letters. Stay on the path. The corn does not like to be disturbed. Do not run. It excites them. Do not touch the scarecrows. They are not for you. If you hear a bell, your time is up. Find your way out. Liam, our resident skeptic, burst out laughing. It excites them? What, the corn? This is gold. We paid our money and stepped into the maze. The walls of corn were easily 12 feet high, rustling with a dry whispering sound in the wind. For the first hour, it was fun. We were laughing, making wrong turns, hitting dead ends. But as the night grew deeper and the moon climbed higher, we realized we were genuinely lost. Every path looked the same. The whispering of the corn started to sound less like the wind and more like voices. I'm getting a little freaked out, Chloe admitted, her breath clouding in the cold air. Relax, Liam said, though he didn't sound as confident anymore. It's just a maze. He turned a corner and came face to face with a scarecrow. It was one of dozens that were staked throughout the maze, and we'd passed it at least twice before. It was a grotesque thing, made of old burlap sacks and straw, with black buttons for eyes and a stitched, jagged grin. In a fit of frustrated bravado, Liam shoved it. "Get out of our way, you stupid thing," he muttered. The scarecrow rocked on its post, its button eyes seeming to stare right at him. An unnerving silence fell over our group. That's when we heard it, a single, clear, resonant ding of a small bell, seemingly coming from all directions at once. Rule 4. If you hear a bell, your time is up. A tangible shift occurred in the maze. The air grew colder. The whispering from the corn grew louder, more insistent. We turned to backtrack, but the path we'd just come down was gone. A solid wall of corn stood where the opening had been. Panic started to set in. "The walls are moving," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "The maze is changing." We started moving faster, no longer laughing. Every corner we turned, we were met with a dead end, or another scarecrow, each one seeming closer than the last. Their stitched smiles felt less like decorations and more like threats. We heard a rustling sound in the corn beside us, fast and heavy. It wasn't an animal. It was pacing us. I risked a glance behind us. The scarecrow Liam had pushed, it wasn't on its post anymore. It was lurching through the corn, its movements impossibly fast and jerky, and it wasn't alone. We all started running then, blind with terror, the rules forgotten. The maze had become a hunting ground. We could hear them all around us, crashing through the corn, their movements getting closer. We saw Liam up ahead. He tripped and fell. He got to his knees just as two of the scarecrows burst through the wall of corn in front of him. They didn't have weapons, they just descended on him, their straw-stuffed limbs wrapping around him, dragging him down into the wrestling stalks. His scream was cut short. We didn't stop. We saw the edge of the field, the distant lights of the parking lot. We just ran straight, not following the path, and burst through the dense wall of corn and out into the open. We collapsed on the frozen ground, gasping for air, and looked back. The maze was silent. The entrance looked just as it had when we went in. We told the police everything. They searched the maze. They found no sign of a struggle, no Liam. Farmer Blackwood claimed Liam had probably just run off, that he'd call when he showed up. He never did. They list him as a missing person, but I know what happened. The maze was hungry, just like the legend said. And that fall, Liam was the harvest. Apple picking is supposed to be the most wholesome fall activity on the planet. Hay rides, warm cider, the smell of cinnamon donuts. It's pure, distilled nostalgia. Or at least, that's what I thought. My ex-boyfriend, Dan, and I found a place online called Hollow Creek Orchard. The website was simple, rustic. It promised apples the way nature intended. What it didn't mention was that nature had some very, very strange intentions. The orchard was deep in the country, miles down a winding dirt road. When we arrived, the place was beautiful, but eerily quiet. There were no other cars, no families laughing among the trees. Just an old, stooped woman named Martha, who ran the place with her two silent, hulking sons. "Welcome to Hollow Creek," she said, her smile not quite reaching her pale, watery eyes. "The rules are simple. Pick as much as you like from the main grove. But the old grove," she gestured with a gnarled finger towards a dark, tangled section of the orchard on a far hill, "that's private, for family only." The apples in the main grove were perfect, almost unnaturally so. Huge, blood red, without a single blemish. But as we picked, I started to notice a strange, sweet, fermented smell hanging in the air. It wasn't the pleasant smell of cider. It was heavier, more cloying, and it seemed to be coming from the big, windowless barn near the farmhouse. Dan, being Dan, was immediately curious about the old grove. While I was paying for our haul, he wandered off. I didn't think anything of it until I finished up and couldn't see him. I called his name. No answer. A prickle of unease ran down my spine. Martha and her sons were watching me from the porch of the farmhouse, their expressions completely blank. I started walking towards the old grove, my calls for Dan growing more frantic. As I got closer, the trees changed. They were ancient, their branches twisted into grotesque human-like shapes. And the fruit, it wasn't apples. Hanging from the branches were these pale, fleshy, heart-shaped pods, veined with thin red lines, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat. They were alive. The rotten, sweet smell was overwhelming here. I saw a half-eaten pod on the ground, its pale flesh torn open. I felt my stomach heave. I was about to turn and run when I saw the barn doors were slightly ajar. I crept closer and peeked inside. The source of the smell was a massive, ancient-looking cider press in the center of the barn, but it wasn't apples they were pressing. Piled around it were heaps of old, discarded clothes and personal effects, backpacks, hiking boots, a single child-sized sneaker. Something was staining the floor around the press. It was dark and red. Then I saw him. Dan. He was standing in a far corner of the barn, next to one of Martha's sons. He was holding one of the pulsating pods in his hand, and he had a strange, placid smile on his face. His eyes were glazed over, unfocused. "Dan?" I whispered. He didn't hear me. "He's part of the harvest now," Martha's voice said from right behind me. I spun around. She was standing there, her two sons flanking her, their blank expressions now holding a chilling, hungry look. The land gives us so much, and all it asks in return is a little help to keep growing. She took a step toward me. "You look like you've had a long journey. You should try the cider. It'll help you settle in." I looked back at Dan. He took a bite of the fleshy pod, and the placid smile on his face widened as a trickle of red juice ran down his chin. He wasn't my Dan anymore. He was theirs. I didn't scream. I just ran. I sprinted for my car, not looking back, the sound of Martha's soft, disappointed sigh following me. I threw myself in, locked the doors, and sped down that long dirt road. I called the police when I finally got a signal. I told them my boyfriend had been kidnapped, that this family was running some kind of cult. They went out there. They found the orchard, but they said it was abandoned. The house was empty, the trees were barren. There was no sign of Martha, her sons, or Dan. The only thing they found was a strange, sweet smell lingering in the old barn. The police report called it unidentified organic matter. I know what it was. It was the cider. And I know somewhere deep in those hills, the harvest is still growing. Thanksgiving is supposed to be about family, about coming home. When my new girlfriend Kate invited me to her family's Thanksgiving for the first time, I was nervous but excited. She described it as a huge town-wide tradition in her tiny, isolated hometown of Havenwood. The whole town celebrates together, she'd said. It's called the Harvest Feast. You'll love it. I had no idea that feast had a very different meaning in Havenwood. The town was deep in the New England forests, a place so small it was just a collection of old houses around a single white-steepled church. The feast was held in the church's large community hall, and Kate was right. It looked like the entire town was there. Everyone was warm and welcoming, shaking my hand, telling me how happy they were that I could join the tradition. The atmosphere was festive, but there was an undercurrent of something else, a strange, almost feverish anticipation. The tables were laden with an incredible amount of food, but no one was eating. They were all waiting. "We don't start until the honored guest arrives," Kate's father explained with a tight smile. I started to feel a creeping sense of unease. Everyone here was related in some way. Cousins, aunts, uncles. I was the only outsider. Kate, who had been so relaxed and happy, now seemed tense. She was watching me, her eyes flitting nervously towards the door. I excused myself to use the restroom and took a walk down a quiet hallway to clear my head. I passed a small, closed door marked Archives. On a whim, I tried the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the room was filled with old, leather-bound photo albums, the town's historical records. I opened one. The album was filled with black and white photos of past harvest feasts going back 100 years. Each photo showed the whole town gathered in this very hall. And in every photo, there was one person I didn't recognize. An outsider, usually a young man or woman, sitting at the head of the table, looking happy and unaware. It was always their first time at the feast, and they never appeared in a photo from the following year. The last photo in the most recent album was from the previous Thanksgiving. A smiling young man I'd never seen before sat next to a girl from the town. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a party, it was a pattern. I slammed the book shut and hurried back to the main hall. Kate met me by the door, her face pale. "Where were you?" she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Kate, what is this? What's going on?" I asked. Before she could answer, the church bell began to toll, a slow, deep, mournful sound. A hush fell over the hall. Kate's father stood up. "The honored guest arrives," he announced, his voice booming. The lights in the hall suddenly went out, plunging us into near total darkness, illuminated only by the candles on the tables. And from outside, I heard a sound, a deep, wet, dragging sound, like something immense and heavy being pulled over the earth. It was coming closer. The townspeople started to chant a low, rhythmic hum that grew louder and louder. It wasn't a prayer. It was an invitation. I looked at the feast on the table, the untouched turkey, the mountains of potatoes. It wasn't for them. I looked at Kate, her tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she mouthed. "It's the only way." The dragging sound was right outside the main doors now, a deep, guttural, sniffing sound. It was smelling the feast. I finally understood. The feast wasn't the food. It was me. My role, the role of every outsider brought here, was to be the centerpiece, the offering. The main doors of the hall began to splinter and buckle inwards. I didn't wait to see what the honored guest looked like. I grabbed a heavy wooden chair and hurled it through the tall stained glass window at the side of the hall. Glass shattered. The townsfolk screamed in outrage. I scrambled through the broken window, cutting myself on the shards, and ran. I ran into the dark, freezing woods behind the church, the sound of a monstrous, inhuman roar echoing from the hall behind me. I didn't stop running until the sound of the town and its hungry guest had faded into the silence of the night. I found a main road at dawn. I told the police an insane story they didn't believe. When they went to Havenwood, they found a town cleaning up after a boisterous party. My girlfriend Kate claimed she'd never seen me before in her life. I had no proof, just a story about a town with a very old and very hungry tradition. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at the comments section, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon. Good night.